If your horse is shortening its stride and picking up its knee and tucking its leg more, as you see a saddle seat horse do, you have much more of a chance of hitting a rail as you go over. And I would go so far as to say that it is dangerous. It just is not something that is mentioned in the USEF rules, because in the open competition, nobody would ever think of doing it. Here in the Morgan, since that's a lot of what we see here, that is why it is mentioned specifically in the Morgan rules. The other thing that is different in the USEF rules versus the Morgan rules is the heights of the fences. There are many different divisions in the hunter world. Regular working hunter, there's low working hunter, there's limit, there's junior exhibitor, there's maiden, there's a multitude of them. A division usually consists of at least 3 classes, frequently 5, or even 6 in open competition, but here we have 3. We have 2 over fences classes and an under saddle class, which consists of a division, and then each placing, 1st through 6th, is awarded a point value, and at the end of the 3 classes, the points are added up, and you end up with a division champion and reserve champion. Here, the regular working hunter is 3'3", 3 foot to 3'3", and in the open competition, it would be 4 feet. So there's quite a bit of difference in height as far as the Morgan and the open competition. Low working here is 2'6", and what is low in open? It's 2'9". So one of the problems as far as crossing over to open competition is you've got to be careful. You can't necessarily just go in the same division unless you're confident that your horse can do the higher jumps. You'll just have to look, there's many different divisions. You'll look for something that's the height that you're comfortable at. So that is one thing that is very different as far as the open competition goes and the Morgans. Other questions? Yes? Good point. The question was, if they don't do the number of strides, do they take points off? What they're looking for is even striding between the jumps. Hunter jumps are usually set up on 12-foot increments, as mentioned, allowing for 6 feet for takeoff and 6 feet for landing, so you subtract 12 feet when you figure your distances for number of strides. 60 feet being 4 strides. If you do not do the correct strides, let's say that one of the horses added a stride here, that would be considered a fault, yes. In jumpers, it makes no difference at all, except for, as was pointed out, that the less number of strides is probably going to win versus adding strides. Yes, if your horse cannot do, let's say you've got a pony or just a horse that's a shorter strided horse, if you consistently added 1 stride for each line that you did, that would be preferable to sometimes adding strides and not adding strides. So whatever you do, it should be consistent, okay? Sometimes you end up with half a stride and you've got to make a decision, and that's called, usually if they add a stride, it's called chipping in, and that is something that would be considered a fault. A minor fault sometimes. Some of the other faults are, of course, a refusal is a major fault. Trotting on course is a major fault in the hunters. A jumper could trot the whole course if somehow they could win it that way. It's not going to happen, but it's perfectly allowable for them to break into a trot if necessary, because again, style doesn't matter. Major faults in hunters would also be dangerous jumping, leaving out a fence, obviously, is elimination. Minor faults would be swapping leads between fences, not changing leads, swamping leads again over around a corner, ticking rails would be considered a minor fault at the judge's discretion. Obviously, a knockdown rail would be a major fault. Horses should do, because trotting on course is a major fault, a hunter should not do a simple lead change, meaning that they break down to a trot and change their lead, or well, even walk. I mean, that wouldn't happen, but they should be able to do a flying change. Actually, what they should be able to do is come off the jump on the correct lead. A lot of times that doesn't happen, so once you get to your corner, you need to be on that correct lead once you start turning. Again, a minor fault would be a late lead change, but a late lead change is better than no change. Yeah, you just want to be having a balanced, smooth ride. So if your horse is, everybody knows that if you're on the incorrect lead or cross cantering, it's not near as smooth and, just considered a fault. Yes?
On your courtesy circles, when is it proper, when is it not? Do you see people do it, do you see people not do it?
I'll let my daughter finish.
Courtesy circles are perfectly acceptable. Sometimes you might see a dashed or dotted line on a course diagram, which will show that they don't want you to save time to make a courtesy circle beyond that point. A lot of times, most of the time you'll see if a jump, the first jump on course is a jump that is coming towards the in gate, you'll see instead of making a courtesy circle, they'll maybe pick up a trot down the other side towards the end of the ring, pick up their canter, and then continue to the jump that way, because there's plenty of room to go ahead and get to the jump without making a circle. It just takes up a lot of time in that case. But most of the time, if a jump is your starting jump is towards it's near the in gate or going away from the in gate, you'll see people make courtesy circles at the beginning and the end, and that is perfectly acceptable. It's pretty proper. You normally see you want them to walk in the ring. Either you can pick up a walk or trot, make a nice smooth transition to the canter, get your canter that you want to proceed to the jump and go ahead during that courtesy circle. That's where that courtesy circle should be used for. At the end, it's to bring your horse back down quietly so that you're not just galloping out of the arena, and it's usually pretty proper to come down to a walk and walk out once you get near the in gate. Circling at any other time on course could be considered crossing your path, which could be considered a refusal. You want to make sure that your course is flowing. If you are circling any other time on course, you're kind of breaking the flow of that course. So usually that you'll see that is definitely penalized as well. Yes?
To go on with that, if your horse does not need to do a circle, can you just go, or should you do a circle?
The question was, if your horse does not need to make a circle, can you leave out the circle and just go? Is that acceptable? I think it depends, once again, how close you are to the jumps. I think usually what you would see in the hunter ring is a courtesy circle if there's not a whole lot of room to get to your first jump. It gives you the time to pick up the canter and organize the canter that you want for the rest of your course. It is certainly something I think it's not necessarily a major fault or anything that you're going to be severely penalized for if you can get smoothly started without it, but it's pretty much common practice to go ahead and do a beginning and ending circle if there's not if you're ending and beginning at the front of the arena at the end game. Any more questions? I probably have time for one more question, and then we probably need to wrap this up. Yes?
Do they mark points off with how your horse holds its head or carries himself?
I believe the question was, so do they mark off points or do they count against you if on how your horse carries himself and goes over the jumps? In the hunter ring, yes. In the hunters, to a certain degree, yes. They're looking for a horse that has a nice round jump. It's pretty even with its front and hind end. And they want the horse to jump fairly round over a jump. They don't want a horse to be too flat or hollow through their back. In the jumper ring, however, that is not an issue. They cannot penalize you for your horse's jumping form. Okay, yes, Julie.
I think it might be good to mention the difference between a frame for a hunter and a frame for an equitation horse. The frame that Oregon people are probably most used to would be the frame that you would use for an equitation horse, which would be more vertical. And the hunters who actually want them to stick their nose out, you don't want them in.
She was just mentioning the difference between an eq horse and a hunter horse and the way you want them to go. And what Oregon people are used to seeing usually is a horse that's more on the vertical and is much more flexed over, and that's more of something you would see in an eq horse. And in the hunters, you do want them to stretch a little bit, and that kind of adds to that nice flowing canter that the horse is on, a nice kind of, you don't want them to be long and flat, but they should be able to stretch and have a nice light contact and not necessarily be completely flexed over on the vertical. That they can stretch their neck and not be completely on the vertical. They should be slightly maybe in front of the vertical. Yes. Okay. I wanted to thank my riders and thank you guys for joining us this evening.